I think that when you're thinking about an event, whether it's bespoke for your company or you're looking at a trade show, some of the things that you want to avoid is one, doing it because it looks like fun, right? Like, and while it might be, if you don't have a direct line of sight to a business outcome, it's just not going to work. The other thing, doing it just because your competitors are doing it. The third thing, when you identify something like, for example, a trade show, and you're like, well, it sort of aligns with your goals, but not exactly, that's a no-go. Has to align directly with your business goals.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
One of the reasons I'm super excited to have Alexis Zinberg with me today is because events are back, and events are sort of back with a vengeance. I'm actually an investor in Beyond Ordinary Events, which produces the Possible conference down in Miami Beach. I'm also an investor in the C-Suite Network, which is doing more and more hyperlocal events. And I keep running into Alexis at events. And so she's in the event business. And, not just trade show type events, but party events, other types of activation. So Alexis, first do a quick self-intro, and then we'll dive into the wonderful world of post-COVID events.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to be introduced to your audience. So I'm Alexis Zinberg. I'm the founder of Treow Solutions, and my company is a strategic marketing consulting practice focused on developing and executing thought leadership platforms that drive growth, reputation, and recognition in the market. And as you mentioned, I've run into you at a ton of events recently, which is fantastic. And that's because I've curated programs for clients across many verticals, including media, health, retail, and technology. And I have worked extensively with, and for trade shows, including CES, NAB, Mobile World Congress, the NRF, and South by Southwest.
Great. So I think we really ran into each other most often in a purely virtual environment. So Shelley Palmer had these salons, and, we were all just squares up on a screen. And, while those things are really great, and they solved a huge need during the pandemic in particular, it seems like events are really back. Sales teams want to be there to sell, but and the marketing teams want to be there for lead gen and awareness and all the upper funnel stuff and lower funnel stuff at the same time. But oddly enough, like, even the people buying seem to want to be there because they feel like they can learn more in a face-to-face conversation. So it really does seem like a win-win when it comes to the return of events and face-to-face and people, relaxing and having beverages or not having beverages, whatever they're doing. So marketing departments are sort of out of practice with events, and some of them never were good at events. So when you get called in and people are like, hey, we want to do this event or an event or whatever, how do you make sure that they're pointed in the right direction, first of all?
It's a great question. And I think, to your point, that post-pandemic, people are craving the opportunity for those personal connections. And this is an amazing opportunity for companies to build upon that excitement and to bring people together. But it's also about bringing the right people together. So I think that it's really about helping a company understand what their business goals and objectives are. And that's where I start with a client. The reason why this is so important is that an event is just another tool to achieve your business objectives. So I think that that's where you have to start. And then from there, I work with a client to build a strategy and approach that's going to meet those objectives. And when we accomplish that, we can then build a detailed roadmap that outlines the steps, the timelines, and the resources required for a successful implementation. And the roadmap really acts as a guide to ensure that the marketing plan is executed systematically and efficiently. And it also serves as a framework that can adapt to changing market conditions and evolving business needs. So you're driving a consistent progress towards a specific client's goals.
Yeah, and it's amazing because, while Did It is occasionally active in events, assisting with events, usually it's not really our primary focus. We're out there doing earned media, we're out there doing paid media. And whenever we talk strategy with a client, we try to understand what's the persona of their best prospect, right? Not just the average prospect, like what defines their best prospect, what defines their best customer. And I'm shocked how often they don't know, right? But when they do know, it obviously allows us to be much more focused in deploying both earned media resources and paid media resources. So when I think about the events ecosystem, obviously there's invite-only events that could be created and orchestrated and curated by a brand. And then there's their participation in things like trade shows. And when I think about trade shows, I think about it almost the same way I think about media buying, which is some percentage of the people there are going to be that premium persona. And then there's going to be a bunch of people who are like, we'll take them, but not so excited. And then there's going to be potentially a pretty big chunk of the people who are like, well, really not interesting to us at all, right? And so those different segments, whether you use quartiles or whatever percentage they are of the audience, making sure you're activating the right people, I think is so key at these events, right? Because especially if you're piggybacking on a big trade show or something and it's only 10% of the people that you really care about, that means 90% of the people there you don't care about at all. And so just showing up is not going to do it.
That's true. I think that when you do an event right and you outline your business objectives in advance and align your efforts accordingly, you can meet your KPIs and have a positive ROI. But when you do it wrong, and unfortunately, it does happen a lot, not only do you waste a lot of money, but you can disappoint potential customers, current partners, and your investors. So we want to avoid that. And I think that when you're thinking about an event, whether it's bespoke for your company or you're looking at a trade show, some of the things that you want to avoid is one, doing it because it looks like fun, right? Like, and while it might be, if you don't have a direct line of sight to a business outcome, it's just not going to work. The other thing, doing it just because your competitors are doing it. The third thing, when you identify something like, for example, a trade show, and you're like, well, it sort of aligns with your goals, but not exactly, that's a no-go. Has to align directly with your business goals. And then the last thing that you want to think about is that you're actually trying to do too much. That's when you try and boil the ocean. It is so much more important to have focus, and that means that you're going to have a higher likelihood for success.
Right. So when there is a trade show, obviously you can just go with the packages that are in the prospectus that the show organizers have put together. Then there's sort of like the Cannes Lions strategy, which is no, we just take advantage of the fact that everybody's there and we do our own thing, right, over somewhere in a hotel or whatever. And there's sort of all the in-betweens, right, which is sort of participating and cooperating with the event versus trying to do your own thing. And so when there is a sort of target-rich environment, right, at a location because of a trade show or an event or whatever, and you want to, you've figured out what your KPIs are, you figured out why you're going to be there in general. How do you start to help people think through, the different levels of budget versus the different levels of engagement, at these types of events? Because you can throw money at stuff, right? Especially the prospectuses of the show producers. They've got stuff that probably starts at 10,000 and goes well, sometimes into the seven figures if you really want to activate.
That's true. And I always tell clients to be wary of the show that says, I can do it all. Just give me your money and I can do it all. Definitely be wary of those, right? So when we think about an event, we want to think, well, what can an event do for me? And this goes back to the business goals and objectives. So are we an event can increase brand awareness. An event can increase your sales pipeline. An event can increase qualified meetings with your team members. You can also be trying to launch a new product. That's a great example of an event. You can position your company as a thought leader, different kind of event. You can also just be focusing on providing education. This might be internally for your team, and it can also be externally. Like, so if your company is going through a brand change or a new product focus, that would be a good example of that. And then, of course, there's the opportunity to increase or deepen partnership relationships. So once you decide which one of those are your business goals and objective, then it's much easier to define a business budget for it, because then we can also calculate the ROI.
Right, right. So let's assume that one of the primary objectives is really just the straight sales type conversations, right? You want to be at this event. You do think it's a target rich environment, even if it's 15 or 20% of the people are really in your key target. You want to have people there. Are there any best practices around like the ratio of your people, whether they're junior salespeople all the way up at the senior level salespeople that should be at an event? Like if you sort of calculated that there are 300 people out of the 3,000 people that you really want to talk to at a conference, is there a guideline of how many people you should send right to that event?
That is such a great question. It's actually something that I'm working on with a client right now. They have and I don't know that there's a specific calculation. So I would describe it as like guidelines, right? Is how we might think about it. Mm-hmm. The first is your floor footprint. So for example, when you are at a trade show, oftentimes a company is going to be exhibiting. They might have a booth, right? And so your booth could be anywhere from 10 by 10. It might be 10 by 20. It could be 40 plus, right? Et cetera. Well, depending on the size of your booth, you don't want to have more people that work for your company in the booth that is bigger than the booth itself, right? So we want to think about that. So that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. So you want to have the right ratio there. But that being said, you want to think about what's the appropriate number for the size of the physical footprint that you have on site. And then are there going to be team members that might be able to be positioned who have different roles and responsibilities beyond the actual booth activation? That what are they going to be doing? Are they going to be proactively searching for those prospects, right? Are they going to be taking those meetings, right? And how many of those meetings do you think you might be able to have? Again, that goes back to your business goals and objectives, and how are we going to measure success? So if our business goal is sales pipeline and we're going to drive people to the booth, we want to make sure that we have the right people in the booth that are going to be able to answer those questions, so that they in turn can then provide it to that next step to maybe an account executive who's going to take that qualified meeting. And how many of those are we going to need? Now, for example, if you're going to be hosting a VIP dinner that's going to be mixed with partners and prospects, say a round number of about 40. That's typically the size that I like to do when I'm hosting a private dinner. And you have somebody from the company who's going to be able to give a speech of some kind and share, something that's happening that's really important and relevant to the industry that they're in. The tables, you would like to have it, typically you'd have 5 tables. You would want to have one salesperson for every table at that restaurant. And then the rest are going to be filled with prospects and partners. So that's the way I look at it.
Right, right. Well, it's good that there are some general guidelines, at least when it comes to the more intimate type of events like the dinners, right? So that you can use it from a planning perspective. One other thing that I see people fail at a lot is, even if there is a good rationale to be at the show, and even if the show is filled with the right people, the ones that are in your wheelhouse, is they don't do any prep work. Right. So they don't let their CRM know we're going to be at the show. Right. They don't pre-promote the show. They don't do any appointment setting for the show. And of course, maybe appointment setting is not always appropriate for every show engagement. But it's certainly in some cases, one would imagine that there are going to be VIP level people who are like already in your sales pipeline or already customers, and you're just trying to cross-sell them or upsell. And to miss the opportunity if they're going to be at the event seems like a huge waste, and it seems like that's going to be a big ROI drain.
Yeah, I think 2 things on that. One, that goes back to why the detailed roadmap is so important, because you are outlining this time, the steps, the timelines, and the resources from your team in order to have a successful implementation. So there should be no surprises, and also no last minute scrambles before the conference to get things done. And what's also important about this is team alignment. And I think that that's something that a lot of companies overlook. having team alignment early on, talking about, having a marketing team approach all areas of the business that are essentially going to be impacted by this event that you're trying to execute, having them understand what the business goals and objectives are, how you are measuring success, and then also what resources you're going to need from each one of those teams in order to help this event be successful is really going to ladder up to a successful implementation. And then when you, as part of this roadmap, I always ask clients, what do you want to happen the day after the event? What does that look like to you? How are we going to define success? What is the next step for your team? And you have to pre-plan that. That shouldn't be a meeting that happens actually after the event. That's a meeting that needs to happen well in advance with all of the team members in a plan that's clearly articulated so that your post-show wrap-up is ready to go days after the event, and it is a seamless transition.
Right. Yeah, that brings to mind another area where I see folks miss opportunities is they don't think about events as content creation opportunities, right? And sometimes the earned media team is sort of struggling with, now how do I create some content? Like, I don't want to just use AI because it's coming off like without personality, and how do I get creative, authentic content? Well, guess what? There's a bunch of people at the conference or show or event or dinner, right, who may be creating any content which is just sort of selfie content, right, all the way through to testimonial conversations or product related conversations or on-site podcasts. I mean, there's so many things that you can do at an event to take advantage of the content creation opportunity. And I see so many folks just forget it. It's like just that splash of the event. It's like they don't do the pre and they don't do the post. And it's like the old way of thinking about PR, which is, oh, great, I got in the Wall Street Journal that day and I never think about it again. Now, obviously, you think about, oh, did I get a link? Is there SEO benefit? How can I repurpose this in my sales packaging and sales literature? The people aren't thinking about events in that way. A lot of times they're not thinking about it from the value of content perspective. So what's a good framework to help them think about, like, is there such a thing as over creating content or event, or should you just like have teams out there thinking about every which way to get event out there?
I think it is so important to take advantage of the content that is created at the event by your company. That can be done. And again, for budgets that are extensive, you're going to hire a production company to help you with that. For companies, let's say, that are on a shoestring budget, you can have your team members take stills with your iPhone or whatever phone of choice. Cameras are fantastic right now. Stills, videos, all of that is great. If your company is going to be speaking on a panel, you should get a video recording of it. Shows will often do the recording themselves. Can just simply ask for the recording after the fact. They're happy to do that because that's extending their reach. So you don't usually have to pay for that yourself. So leveraging those opportunities, that content gives you an opportunity to to break it up into bite-sized chunks that can be used for months to come. And that can be done on social media, whatever channel your company is. It can be done in direct emails. It can be done in newsletters. Hey, in case you missed the show, here's a link, find out what we did. It's interesting. Sometimes at a show, maybe a company might be disappointed by the number of people that are in the room in a particular panel. And I get that. You work really hard to bring people together and you're on stage and you've got this great content. But at the end of the day, if it's recorded, you have the opportunity to use your channels to extend the reach and the life of that content. Grab it on video and send it out to everybody that you know. And that's going to be a big win. It'll be just like they were sitting in the room.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So one thing that where one of the places we met recently was an event where my nonprofit Giving Forward had done its Good Pics, charity headshots deployment, which I inadvertently invented, and because people wanted headshots, but the sort of green element of it was also sort of important to some people, where they were like, oh, this is a great high value giveaway. It's, worth $200, but it costs about as much as a water bottle when you do the math to give away. Our event producers also starting to think a little bit from the, we have to be more green. Because I remember back, 15 years ago, the amount of landfill that an event would create was just extraordinary. And I sort of feel like, there's been a little bit of a change in thinking at the producer level and maybe also from the exhibitor and sponsor level about, what's our footprint? I mean, they may still fly to the event in their Gulfstream G4 if it's the CES, but, at least from the perspective of the event itself, I do feel like there's been a little bit of a shift in, trying to provide greener giveaways and greener activations. Do you find that?
I do. I think zero waste is a big theme that I'm seeing across the companies that I'm working with. And I think something like Good Picks, which cause marketing is definitely falls on, it kind of hits all of those check boxes, which is great. I myself had the opportunity to have my headshot taken, which was great. And actually, if you go on my LinkedIn, that is my headshot that's being used. I love it. All of my materials now have my beautiful headshot from Good Picks. So thank you. And it was a great seamless experience, excuse me. And it was also just a great opportunity to see a great activation in place. So well done on your part. When I work with clients to figure out what, swag do they want to bring to an event or develop, again, I ask them, what are your business goals and objective? Does this swag have purpose and meaning? Does it tie to the success metric of the event? If it doesn't, then it's just a waste of money. And again, for example, I have clients that have given away plush toys at their booth or at an event. And that might drive a lot of traffic because people love gimmicks. They love toys. They bring them home to their pets. They bring them home to their kids, whatever it is, yeah, sure. It's like a freebie. That's not necessarily the target audience that you're looking to get. And it doesn't translate into the ROI that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do remember that the only two times I've ever had a line at a booth were with the Good Picks deployment. And when we were actually giving away a stuffed animal frog in Did It's early days with 2 logos ago. And we had these plush frogs that if you squeezed them, they said, did it, because they had a voice chip in it. But I wasn't going to give them away just for folks who came by to the booth, because when I was in college, I worked at a traveling carnival running games. And I'm like, oh, no, we're running a game, which automatically created a line because you had to do frog in a bowl game to get your frog. And so it was funny. I artificially created a line, which I didn't know till years later, oh yeah, well, producers for any kind of a venue, like a party, they always want the line out front because without a line, it's not exciting. So I had inadvertently discovered the sort of importance of the line and the fact that that line becomes a captive audience for the sales team, right?
That's right.
And so I'd love to hear other ways in which you've found that, you can take advantage of that captive audience in a show environment.
So I think content is king. To me, that in this day and age, that is the most important thing that a company can do, especially as we're thinking about brand awareness and how to position your company as a thought leader. And I think that I work with clients to think about what is exclusive that they can bring to the conference that's going to be relevant to the audience that they're trying to reach. And is that going to be a report? Is that going to be a panel? Is that going to be a fireside chat? Is this going to be exclusive information that they're not going to be able to get unless they are face to face with the client? And I think that that is really important for the people who are unable to attend the conference but are interested in getting that information. We can create a mechanism where you can request the information and create, tiers, right, of outreach of how to then connect with those people after the show.
Right, right. Yeah, one thing that happened during the pandemic, which I don't think anybody could have predicted, was the QR code came back from the dead, right?
Yeah,
Because you couldn't order in a restaurant during the pandemic if you didn't know how to use one. Um, but in a trade show environment, the sort of byproduct of that is I remember back, 10, 15 years ago at trade shows and conferences, the amount of printed collateral, right,
yeah,
that would be created and dragged to the trade show and then often shipped back to the office afterwards, at which point it sat in a storage unit until it became obsolete, and then it went into the garbage, right? Now, I've seen increasing numbers of booths that have a QR code right there, right, for the person to
that's
just
right.
slow down, stop, scan the QR code, register, and get the stuff delivered via PDF. Or I guess you could still mail it to them if you wanted, right? If you wanted them to have the physical copy, because there's certain gravitas that comes with the physical paper version, right? But the amount of sort of, again, from the greening of the events perspective, that's sort of a great way that technology has sort of greened the events in general. Uh, um, are there other activations that you've seen work really well, to slow down the traffic in booths? I mean, back in the very pre-politically correct days, right, there were what were, I guess, called booth babes, which was really like a
Yep,
gross term for what how they people staff booths. But these are people who knew nothing about the product, right? But
correct.
they were just attention getters. Now you can't get away with that anymore, thank goodness, right? But you still need some kind of a hook to get the people to slow down when they're walking, when they're walking the aisles of the show. So how do you think about that? If a good percentage of the regular attendees of a show are in your target audience, you want to slow them down, you want to engage them. Any best practices there?
I think it comes down to the product that you're trying to promote. What is the product that you're trying to promote, and how are we going to highlight it in a way that's going to be the most engaging? And I don't know that there's a one size fits all approach for that. There just isn't. And so, but I think that is there an opportunity for people to engage with the product, to have that emotional connection with the product? That obviously is going to be really important. Is there some kind of experience that they can have at the booth that's, again, going to have a tie-in to your business goals and objective? That's really important. Some of the things that you know we talk about with clients is creating, because if they don't, let's say for example, have money to be on a main stage, they can create mini events within set times in their booth and give people a reason to come at a very specific time. So for example, whether it's like coffee and bites, and they're going to have like a mini content session there, again relevant to the product, or a display or something unique if it's a product launch, like a private demo, etc. But again, people like those VIP experiences, and that's where the pre-marketing is so important, right? And the cross-channel marketing is going to be really important in terms of reaching that audience and leveraging all available channels to do that.
Right, right. The Are you still helping clients also with their sort of virtual event execution? Because there's lots of words that get thrown around with regards to that. You've got the webinar, you've
Yeah.
got the roundtable, you've got the mastermind, and all these have slight nuances between the way they're executed. And they do take advantage of the fact that T&E budgets haven't come back necessarily across the entire ecosystem, right? So you still, in some cases, some of your folks that are in your target audience, big picture, are not going to go to the event because they don't have T&E budget yet. It got slashed during the pandemic and it hasn't come back, right? And so
Yeah.
they can't get to the event, but you still want to be able to activate those people and engage those people and educate those people. So are you also helping with executing those strategies, the virtual versions?
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to the business goals and objectives and who your target audience is. So a webinar or a live stream might make sense for something that's internal, where people can feel connected to the broader organization, especially if you're located all around the country or all around the world. I think that's really important. For other conferences, for example, it might be a better approach, instead of live streaming, to record the sessions that are happening, and then ensure that after everything is done, you can break it up into bite-sized content and send out, create a landing page, create an environment where it is easily digested by somebody who's looking for that content. I think that it is unrealistic to think that somebody is going to sit at their computer for 7 hours and watch something straight through and get something out of it. I just do.
Right.
I think that's unrealistic. So I think that if you have a conference, a full day conference, for example, record it. And then for people who are unable to attend, you can provide those recorded sessions to those members who are interested. And again, you can cut it down. And that's the beauty of, of condensing.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, this may or may not be in your area that you do for clients, but I certainly, media training and the
Yeah.
make sure that the speakers' slides are actually, not too dense and, right to the point so that they really use them. They talk to the content that's on the slide as opposed to sort of reading the slide. And it would seem that that's even more important if you're planning on repurposing it later, right? Because you almost need to plan through your presentation thinking about, well, how do I make this snackable, right? Which pieces of my 20-minute presentation are going to be the 3-minute pieces or the 5-minute pieces that I'm going to grab out of the recording, turn into its own snackable content, and then promote on socials, right? Do you help the teams think through that when they're planning out the presentations and the topics that they'll be speaking about on stage?
Absolutely. I think that that's something, that's kind of like speaking 101, right? We definitely don't want to have people that are reading from a document that's a leap behind, right? You don't need to be on stage in order to do that. I think you want to engage the audience, create that connection point, inspire people so that they want to learn more. Oftentimes the best slides are actually just simply images, right? To illustrate something that you're talking about. I think that if there's something that's more extensively needed, there are people who are actually experts in that space who can work with teams to do that. But certainly, as we think about how are we going to manage the content after the fact, we can then take the presentation. Like if you're then going to have recorded content and distribute it, we can modify the slides in a post-production environment so that it seems more seamless and more appropriate for the people who are just watching it on screen.
Another thing is sort of tangential to events, but ends up being pretty important is whether it's a pay for play event or the speaker actually got invited to be part of a panel or to present their subject matter expertise. Certainly in the pay for play environment, the company gets to choose who's up there, right? And I've certainly seen, in a few cases with clients, again, when we're occasionally tangentially involved there, that ends up being a fairly political and ego-driven conversation internally, because there may be a product manager who's like totally immersed in like the nitty-gritty of it, right? And understands things inside and out. And then there may be a founder who may be not as charismatic, or you could have the flip side where the founder is super charismatic, but has been out of touch with how the product is made and how the product is used, to where, okay, so they have the stage presence, but they may not have the expertise, doing a Q&A. So how does one guide the client through the sticky wickets of, deciding, okay, who gets to be up there and given what our objective is, what the topic is, etc.
That is so tricky because we have all been at those conferences where the interstitial is the pay to play. And you're just looking at your watch going, oh my gosh, how much longer do I have to sit through this?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And it's really challenging. And you understand why pay to play has to happen because it helps offset the cost of the event. So I always feel for the people who are in that, for the event producers, because I'm like, oh gosh, this hurts. It is really tricky. I think that this comes down to how the sponsorship is sold in, the relationship management with the person, between the company and the event organizers, and helping the sponsor understand how they can best achieve their outcome. I think when you look at, again, it always comes down to the business goals and objectives and the KPIs for success. And you can do that in a very non-emotional way. And once you are laser focused on that, it is a lot easier to have that conversation about who is the right person to be on stage in order to achieve those business outcomes.
For companies that are going to have a subject matter expert who's ramping up their level of participation as a speaker, as a panelist at events, but they could benefit from media training and presentation training. Are there any shortcuts, or do they really have to get immersed by a professional in sort of media training?
I would recommend it. I think it's a great opportunity. That's professional development. I think that companies should be investing in their employees. It makes their employees better, and in turn, it makes their companies better. And so I wholeheartedly support that kind of professional development.
Great. Well, any other things that we didn't cover that are sort of really important for folks getting back into the event side of things as marketers that they should be, make sure that they do, other than call you, which of course is an obvious.
I think that as they think through an event, again, focus on your business goals and objectives, think about your KPIs, and you want to make sure that your team is aligned. And we want to think about good project, do you have the right team in place that's going to have the project management skills to manage internally and externally, because there are so many vendors, so many moving pieces that need to happen in order to have an event executed correctly. And it's really important to focus on the details. The devil is in the details. Every detail counts. Is there going to be water stations? Is there enough coffee? Is there enough food? Is there enough signage of how people are going to get to the event? Is the agenda being properly communicated? Little details, the branding on site. When those details are executed correctly, the people at your event will appreciate them. But also they will realize that if you are paying attention to those details, that means that you as a company are going to be paying attention to them in that way, as a customer, as a partner, and as an investor.
Right. The reason I had to smile is because people only notice those things when they're missing, right?
That's right.
When they're there, it's so smooth, so seamless, like everything works so smoothly. People don't say, oh, that was really nice signage. I mean, you and I might notice it, but most people don't notice, like, oh, that signage was really great. And oh, that agenda was really easy to navigate in the app or on the website or on the printed piece, right? It was just so clear and so laid out, and the tracks made sense. And when it's bad, then everybody notices, right? When it's missing.
And those details, when executed well, don't just happen. There are so many people that were part of that experience to ensure that seamless experience. So I think, kudos to the groups who recognize the importance of it and doing it well. And for the groups that don't do it well, we all know, we've been through it. It's hard to go through. Hopefully you will have learned from that experience and, do it better next time.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing all your wisdom with everyone and myself. Look forward to catching up in the future.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.